So far, version 2 of Honkai Star Rail has added a total of 6 characters completely dedicated to the break archetype. Of course, Ruanmei is also a mainstay of the team for multiple reasons, but the 4-star that debuted alongside her in 1.6 has not had quite the same relevance. While there were a couple previous characters that certainly benefited from enemies being weakness broken, Xueyi really felt like the first proper break DPS, pioneering design luxuries like being able to reduce enemy toughness regardless of type, and having additional damage scaling with break effect to relieve some of the pressure of wanting to build break and crit at the same time. Although the introduction of Harmony Trailblazer certainly gave her a better team to support her, she's never really been a very good asset to this top tier composition, and as more break characters continue to be released, she'll only fall further into obscurity. Let's talk about why Xueyi is the best break DPS to have been completely left behind by Super Break. At the very start of Star Rail, when the community was still figuring out how to best use characters, there was a lot of exploration with full break builds. It did enough damage to be a decent strategy, even with characters that didn't have any break related abilities. But it was clear that the mechanic had some issues. It's often really inconvenient to try and break enemies with a specific character. Like, you'd ideally want more teammates that can deal toughness damage to get to the breaking point faster, but then you're more likely to run into a situation where you're forced to break with the wrong character. Saving an ultimate for it is generally pretty bad since you'd be potentially wasting a lot of energy and then miss out on damage because of it. Then there's also the fact that you have to wait until the enemy recovers in order to perform another break to do more damage, and that's just not something other characters have to worry about. I mean, when endgame content encourages faster clears, yeah, waiting for the enemy to move kinda sucks. Even DOT users had already solved this problem by being able to proc them early with their abilities. Xueyi was released about 8 months into Star Rail's launch, and it's pretty clear that her kit makes somewhat of an attempt to combat these problems, so how did that turn out? The biggest thing that stands out is her Ascension 2 passive, which increases her damage dealt by 100% of her break effect up to a maximum of 240%. Gradual introductions of equipment and teammates that can provide BE allowed her to get closer to this limit while still having room to build crit stats, provided you get some decent luck with your relic rolls. And although damage percent unfortunately doesn't actually do anything for break damage, ultimately this trace helps a lot for Xueyi's usability. She's able to put down much more damage as she reduces an enemy's toughness bar, and she still hits hard while waiting for them to recover. However, when you get around to the rest of her abilities, some cracks start to show. Xueyi's problems are very different from other characters whose designs I've criticized before. She does have clear direction for her design and abilities to support that direction, but there's just a lot of smaller issues that really add up. Let's start with her talent. When Xueyi reduces toughness with attacks, she gets stacks to activate her follow-up attack. This scales with the amount of toughness reduced, and allies can also generate stacks but are limited to 1 per attack, no matter how much toughness it reduces. Her having a follow-up to begin with makes a ton of sense because it synergizes with Quantum's unique break debuff, Entanglement. There's a small bit of design disparity because it delays actions scaling with break effect, so it does take longer to reset and break again, but Entanglement does more damage the more times you hit the enemy before they recover, making the attacks you get in during this period have some actual meaning. Up to 4 times, that is. Well, that's how a follow-up would be beneficial in theory, but it's not completely reliable to execute on that plan when it has random targeting, and you can't generate stacks while enemies are weakness broken. Seeing as how the follow-up can't generate stacks for itself either, the implications suggest that it's primarily meant to be a tool used to whittle down enemy toughness bars to set up for break while getting some extra damage. However, the random targeting again introduces unnecessary variance that could end up with you breaking with the wrong character. Limiting the stacks generated by teammates also really just means that going for faster breaks reduces the amount of follow-ups Xueyi can potentially launch. For most designs, doubling down on what they are good at is the best thing you can do for them, but this talent more so feels like it doubles down on break's weak points. It's quite frustrating given how much the rest of her kit is spent towards empowering this talent. Her first Eidolon increases its damage, her second allows it to ignore weakness type and heal, and 6th decreases the number of stacks needed to launch the follow-up from 8 to 6. Also, her 6th Ascension trace allows her to exceed the stack limit if she generates too many, which is definitely nice, but is most certainly outdated for a passive when newer characters have the same mechanic built into their follow-ups from the start. Xueyi's other biggest strength is that she can ignore weakness types on her ultimate and follow-up, but I think they really fumbled by not giving her this quality on her skill. Her ultimate is great, especially with it dealing 40 break damage as opposed to the 30 that other single target ults hit for, but she really needs toughness damage from her skill in order to get the most value out of her talent. Maybe they did this because you can run Silverwolf alongside her, but it makes her general usability so much lower. Against non-quantum weak enemies, she can't get a lot of stacks even if her teammates do tons of toughness damage because it's capped, but even if she does get follow-ups off, they do low toughness damage, have random targeting, and barely generate any energy. If I could, I'd make 3 simple changes to Xueyi's kit to make her more consistent. I would change her E2 to ignore types on her skill rather than her talent, even at a reduced rate would be okay. I'd let her generate stacks when hitting weakness broken enemies, and I'd make her follow-up instead trigger on the enemy she targets after attacking while having enough stacks. I prefer this over the smart targeting that Lingsha has on her follow-up because hitting the wrong target could accidentally lower your ultimate damage, so I think having total control is the best avenue. I think these changes would help solidify Xueyi as a secondary DPS that can deal good damage while setting up breaks for other characters, which seems to kind of be how Hoyoverse might have intended for her to play, since her ultimate does considerably more damage to enemies with high toughness. It's also a role that no other character really attempts to fill, and Super Break would allow her to make use of her break effect without being the main break initiator. But even if Xueyi were given these buffs, would that have made her more relevant? The introduction of Super Break was definitely necessary to push Break from being that one mechanic that makes you want to match weakness types to a proper team archetype. On its own, it fixes all of the original problems I mentioned, because any teammate can break and allow the whole team to dish out Super Break damage, and you actually get continuous benefits from enemies remaining broken. Xueyi is definitely helped from these additions, but the external conditions surrounding Break make it harder for her to fit in. I mean, straight away, Harmony Trailblazer is going to be a mainstay of Break teams probably forever. Even characters that have built-in Super Break really need them to maximize their damage, which is why I don't find it surprising they decided to give out HMC for free without even requiring you to progress that far in the story. I feel like Super Break is designed how Break should have functioned to begin with, but its implementation made a lot of sense given that changes to existing systems can cause a lot of unintended problems. But now that leads to a situation where you have hard staples in the Trailblazer, a break healer, and Ruan Mei, who has become even better of a damage amplifier due to Super Break scaling with her enhanced toughness damage and her ult's weakness break extension giving a wider window for Super Break. This core is pretty much able to make any break character insanely strong, but Xueyi is obviously the weakest because she has the hardest fall off against enemies that aren't weak to her type. And when you think about it, a character that sets up break isn't really that necessary when the main break DPSs all have ways to enhance toughness damage, so they don't have any issues getting fast breaks off. And if you're missing Ruan Mei and need a secondary attacker to fill that last slot, you have Hunt March 7th, who is completely free to E6, doesn't care for skill points like Xueyi does, and will always have 100% uptime on toughness damage as long as your main attacker is one of the recommended types. I would not go as far as saying Xueyi is a bad character in her current state, but the current landscape of break characters just doesn't allow her to thrive in any way, and any buffs she could possibly receive wouldn't put her ahead of her alternatives. It's a real shame because I think she has some of the coolest visual design and visual effects even though she's only a 4-star. Well, maybe her downfalls contributed to Super Break actually fixing what was wrong with Break. Subscribe for more Honkai Star Rail discussion videos, and as always, thanks for watching.